What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Joe here from Blue Line Woodworks, and in today's video I'm going to show y'all my process for making tabletops. Now, I know there's a bunch of videos and information out there on the internet about how to do this, right? But if you're like me, I like to pick out little tips and tricks from different sources and then make it my own so that my workflow is more efficient. So I'm hoping that you'll get something out of this video. Maybe I'm using a tool that you have, and in another video they were using a tool that you don't have, but I'm going to talk about kind of alternatives as well on specific steps of the process where you can swap in different tools that you might have depending on where you're at in your woodworking journey. Because I built tables when I first started with very minimal tools. Now that I've been doing it for a longer amount of time, I've upgraded my tools, and that's just kind of the flow of how things go. You start with very basic tools, and then you get the nicer, more expensive things that make your workflow more efficient. So let's get into it. It's gonna be an 8-quarter ash tabletop. It's gonna be a little smaller than a typical table because this is gonna be going off of a kitchen for a client of mine. So they have a very specific dimensional need that has to work for that space. So I'm just gonna get into it. Probably gonna be doing mainly voiceover on this, but if you have tips or tricks, better ways to do things, questions on why I'm doing something the way I'm doing it, please leave it in the comments, because I try to answer as many of those comments, and even if it's just a thank you for your feedback, I try to do that. So if you're new to the channel, I really appreciate it if you subscribe. Y'all's support is how I keep doing these videos, and for y'all returning, thank you so much. It's awesome. The support you guys show me here and on Instagram, it's awesome. So I'm gonna stop saying awesome, and I'm just gonna start building this tabletop. So stick around if you wanna see how I do it. Let's roll. So I decided not to do a voiceover. I'm just gonna go through it step by step because it's just way easier. So whenever I start building a tabletop, I always start at the miter saw. Now I leave everything about at least an inch or an inch and a half long, so that after it's all glued up, if there's any shift, I can chop the edges off, make it super clean and square. So this is gonna be a 60-inch table, so I'm gonna mark out 61.5 inches and make all my cuts. Now, tools for this process, you can use a miter saw. I just have a regular miter saw. It doesn't slide. That's on the upgrades list. So a sliding miter saw is gonna make this a little bit easier, but if your boards are too wide, just use a circular saw. You can use a little carpenter square like this and put your saw right up against it so it's a nice straight edge, and make that rip cut. And by leaving it a little bit long, it doesn't have to be perfectly square. So those are your options on this step. Once the boards are cut to the rough length, the next step that I take is I want to go in and clean up any edges that aren't nice and square. So luckily from the lumber store, these were already ripped one edge. So I'm going to take them to the table saw to clean it up. But more than likely, you're going to have to joint an edge, right? So using a joiner is obviously going to be the easiest way to do that. But then I have a joiner jig that I made for my table saw. You can check out that video here, and you can use it for thinner stock, and if you need it for larger stock, like 8-quarter stuff, if you just get bigger toggle clamps, and you'll know what I'm talking about if you watch that video, it'll work perfectly. So because one edge is already ripped, I'm just going to take it to the table saw, and I'm going to remove any of the nasty edges so that everything's nice and square, and then I'll move on to the next step. Next up, I'm going to dress all the boards up to the same thickness on the planer, and then I will clean them up one more time on the table saw, and they'll be ready for glue up. I'm back at the table saw after getting everything to the exact same thickness on the planer, and I just want to try to explain this step the best that I can. So I'm working with relatively straight stock. Now if you have stock that has a real big bow in it, you're going to either have to use a joiner or use the joiner jig like I talked about earlier. But I want these joints to be seamless. So I did talk about in an earlier video, I'll leave a card here, just using the track saw. That works great as well. But I don't want to have to bust out the track saw every time I got to joint some edges. So I run these boards through the table saw and I take maybe a 1/16 of an inch off, maybe. Just enough to get a clean edge. So what I'm gonna show you is I'm gonna run a board through like this. We'll say that this side is gonna be up against the fence. So once that board runs through what was once the top, I'm just gonna flip over. So that opposite side is now against the fence, and it's the same thing. Just tap that fence over so that's like a 1/16 of an inch coming off of this side. And just do that a couple times, like 2 or 3 times, where you flip the board over every time, running it through the same way, and watch your seams disappear. So I'm gonna show it to you. I hope it makes sense, but you'll see when I'm actually running this last board through. Now I have all the boards just laying on my workbench, so they are not in clamps, not everything is perfectly level, but I just want to show y'all how making those tiny little passes on the table saw can make your joints disappear. Now again, this isn't even a super level surface that these boards are sitting on. So there's going to be a little bit of a difference on where they're laying, and the next step is going to help that. But watch this just disappear. It works. Use it. If you don't have a joiner, use that tip. It works. Now let's get these ready for glue up. There are a few steps that you want to make sure you complete prior to actually putting glue down and clamping up your tabletop. The first is going to be grain orientation. So all of these boards are laid out with the ones that I want to be the top, and I have them alternating with the grain going up and the grain going down. Now what I mean by that, this is just another panel that I had glued up for reference. You can see the grain on this board is a U, then on this one it's like a rainbow, and then again it's a U. You just want to alternate because the wood is going to move. So if you have all U shapes on the end, there's a chance that your board, not your board, your whole tabletop could end up cupping slightly, but you don't want that. That's a bad look for you. Nobody wants a freaking half pipe tabletop to eat off of. So alternating the grain is just going to minimize the chances of that happening. So now that I have all the boards laid out, I'm going to strike some lines all the way across for dominoes. These are just going to help with alignment of the boards and make sure that they stay nice and flat, so it's less work that I have to do with a sander or a hand planer. So if you don't know what a Festool domino is, it's a super fancy expensive tool that puts these little floating mortise and tenon joints in here, and it helps with alignment and structural integrity. Do you need this? You sure don't, because you know what else is on the market that is far more cheaper and works just as well for board alignment is biscuits. So a biscuit joiner you can pick up for, I know you can pick up a nice one for like 150 bucks, maybe 200 at the max, compared to like $1,000 for a domino joiner. But it just uses these biscuits. So it cuts slots in the boards, and these just help with alignment. So if you're going to be using a thick tabletop, like around 2 inches, if you're using 8/4 material, I would highly advise that you do 2 rows of biscuits, because these, as far as structural integrity, they're not really going to help, but the wood glue will be just fine. But using 2 rows is going to keep this tabletop nice and flat for you once you take it out of clamps. So I'm going to be using the dominoes, but I've used plenty of these in the past. This is just an upgrade from this. So let's get it done. And I just like to mark each joint with a number or a letter. That way I know it corresponds, because as I'm joining these, I'm gonna be taking a board, hitting it with the machine, and then putting it back. So I wanna make sure I put it back in the right spot. All the domino slots are cut into each piece. And again, if you're using a biscuit joiner, it's probably good to double up on those just to help out. So I'm just gonna be using some Titebond 2. And then if you don't have an ink roller, I highly suggest you get one, because it makes gluing up large, thick stock like this super easy, and they're only a couple bucks. After you use it, just sit it in a little cup of water, all the glue comes right off, and it's ready to go for the next time. And then I just use one of these brushes to help get down into the little domino slots here. So I'm gonna get this glued up. The tabletop is glued up. I've got a nice even squeeze out coming from all of the joints. That's what you're looking for. I put a light coating of glue on each side. You don't need a ton, so as long as you're getting a little squeeze out, you're good. But you don't want to put too little either, because a glue deprived joint is not a strong joint, and you'll regret it and you'll wish you put more in. It's easier to clean up excess than not have enough. But I've got alternating clamping pressure, having a hard time saying that. Parallel clamps on the bottom and pipe clamps on the top, because that's what I got. As far as cost with clamps, clamps are expensive, but we need a lot of them. Pipe clamps are money. You can get the little attachments here at your local home improvement store, and then the pipe is very inexpensive, and they can thread it there for you, if I'm not mistaken, or you can buy a pipe threader yourself, and they just screw right on, and it's super easy. So you can get some big clamps for not a lot of money compared to trying to buy giant parallel clamps. So just keep that in mind. Unfortunately, I have to go to work, so I can't sit here and wait 45 minutes to an hour or so like I would like to, where I can scrape off the glue so that it's easier to clean up. So once the glue starts, curing a little bit and gumming up, just take a little like scraper tool and just run it right along there. It cleans up the glue, and it's gonna save you a lot of sanding time. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to do that, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of sanding. But that's really how I assemble the tabletops. I'll probably, no, we'll just talk about it right now. So I'm gonna sand it all the way down to 220, just running through the grits, starting at 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220, boom. And it's gonna get finished more than likely with Odie's oil. Just gotta check with my customer. They have kids, so Odie's is a very nice finish, but there are more durable finishes out there, I believe. So they might wanna go with something more durable. But that is how I finish tabletops. Odie's just wipes on. You guys can see it in my other videos, how I apply it. Super easy, and the finish is outstanding on it. But if I go with something else, I'll just spray it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I didn't talk too much, but that is how I assemble my tabletops. Whether it's a 5-foot tabletop like this or an 8-foot tabletop, that's kind of how I do it. And make sure you guys check out those videos that I put cards in along the way to look out for the other jigs and the way that I aid in making tabletops, especially if they're live edge or something like that. So thank you guys as always for watching. Really appreciate the support. More videos coming. I'm gonna keep knocking them out. So if you're not subscribed already, make sure you do so. And if you want daily updates, follow me on Instagram. But that's it. That's all I got. Thank you guys so much. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.